on this episode of Indiana Education Insight.
One of the reasons why we're seeing a shortage of teachers. You add this on top of all of that, and teachers are just going to feel really disrespected.
Every week, the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents is taking you inside today's Indiana education collaboration and tomorrow's education trends. We're staying on the pulse of public school innovators throughout Indiana and beyond. Join our conversation and contribute to our upcoming topics at IAPSSIN.org/podcast. Here's your host, Dr. J.T. Coopman.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Indiana Education Insight. I'm Dr. J.T. Coopman, Executive Director of the IAPSS. This podcast is being delivered by our IAPSS team and produced by our friends at Edge Media Studios. As Executive Director of IAPSS, I'm excited to bring you this weekly show where we feature Indiana education innovators from all over our great state, from students to superintendents. We'll also be talking to higher education leaders and some at the state level as we work together as proactive public education advocates. That's why IAPSS is here and why we're proud to bring you this show. Every week, we're talking about trending topics in public education while bringing in Indiana education innovators to hear their perspective. As with any organization, it takes great leadership to be successful, and that is one of the main missions of IAPSS, developing great school district leaders. It's always great to have experienced and passionate educators joining the show, so let's get started with today's conversation.
Topics and trends in Indiana education.
Today's guest is Mr. Tom Mellish, Executive Director of the Indiana Retired Teachers Association. Mr. Mellish has been in this role for almost 4 years, and in doing so, very active in lobbying for the state of Indiana for retired teachers, and also previously served as an Indiana principal and teacher. So having the ability to look at education from various education lenses is very important. Mr. Mellish has been a tremendous asset to public education in Indiana, and let's find out how he views issues in Indiana public schools. Welcome, Mr. Mellish. We are thrilled to have you join us on today's podcast. So, Tom, how long have you been involved with the Indiana Retired Teachers Association, and what got you interested in this role?
Actually, you aged me there quickly. I've only been in it 2.5 years with the retired teachers. Got me interested. My mother was past president back in 2001, 2003, so I sort of knew what their mission was, and always been a member ever since then. And then when the executive director's position came up, I thought that'd be something I'd be interested in doing and giving back since my parents were educators, my wife's an educator, and my wife's parents were educators. I just thought another way to give back, and I've always been around. All my friends are teachers, family of teachers, so just a way to give back to them and hopefully support them and keep them so they have a sustainable and a good retirement.
Okay, well, it's in your blood, so to
Yes.
speak. What do you feel like are some of the important aspects of the Indiana Retired Teachers Association?
Biggest thing I'm finding as I've been in this role is the advocacy part with the legislature. We're definitely a war on public pensions around the country, and here in Indiana, we've been without a cost of living increase for 8 years now, and I always felt that teachers never expected to get rich. We went in it for the right reasons to help kids and things, and but I think they should have like I said, a sustainable retirement and also a dignified after giving all these years of service to do that. So the advocacy part is definitely a big part, and then just looking at different ways that help retired teachers through insurances, benefits, and different things if we can get a better cost for them, especially since, when they have their pensions and Social Security, you're not getting much of an increase in your living. You need to stretch that dollar as far as you can.
Absolutely. So as a lobbyist in the General Assembly, what are some of the key things that you do as a lobbyist, and are there key individuals that you need to speak with?
We mainly work through the budget and labor and pensions group. So Dr. Tim Brown on the House of Representatives, a key person, and then everyone on the Labor and Pensions Committee in the House. On the Senate side, again, appropriations with Senator Kinley, big power player there, and then using their Labor and Pensions Committee also are the main people that we need to contact and attend their meetings and meet with them individually and just give them our points and the reasons why we're for a bill or against a bill.
I'm going to kind of go off script here a little bit, Tom. In comparison to other states' retirement plans, how does Indiana stack up against other states by way of their pension plan?
People are complaining that our pensions aren't as high as neighboring states, but in Indiana, you have to remember we also draw Social Security, so that makes up, I think, our pensions somewhere between 30 to 33% of your final salaries average, and then Social Security makes up about 36% of that. So we're up around 66%, and then if you add in the annuity part, that's 8%. So you're up replacing your salary about 74%. On there, and then if you've been able to put anything else away in that. So you've got a fairly sustainable one. Cost of living, obviously, with costs going up in that. But when you look at Illinois, they're strictly, they get a COLA every year, but they do not draw Social Security. Texas is the same way. Kentucky, I believe, is the same, although they had health care put in, although they've taken that one away. So it's hard to compare apples to apples across the state, but when you take a look at what ours offers, it's not bad at all, especially if you've been able to put something else away. And if we could squeeze a COLA out of the legislature, it'd be a lot better.
Sure.
Or a larger 13th check is what they call it, the small stipend they get that we've been able to get for quite a few years. It's roughly $450 before taxes.
Right. Yep. So there's defined benefits, and then there's defined contributions. What are the differences between a defined benefit and a defined contribution?
Defined benefit is your pension itself, that you collect that check. School corporations put that money in, and it comes back, and that's your monthly pension check that you get. The defined contribution, which is sort of like we have a hybrid plan in Indiana. We have the ASA account, the annuity savings account, and that you can roll into your pension or you can pull that out, all or part of it now with the new legislation, and use it however you'd like to do. And that 3% goes in toward your annuity on your pension plan. Now with the new legislation coming out, the new teachers are going to be able to decide if they want to go into a 401k or an annuity side of the pension or the defined contribution side. So that's going to be a tough thing to educate seniors coming out of school. All of a sudden they've got to think, what do I want in retirement? And they're usually thinking about car, apartment, getting their classrooms ready, those type of things. So it's going to be tough decisions on them where we knew we were going, what plan we were in. Our biggest decision was how we wanted to invest it, how aggressive on the annuity side on that.
Well, and currently, if I understand it correctly, is that there's a teacher contribution and then there's a school corporation contribution. What are those the same percentages, and is that taken out every month? How does that work?
For the state, yes, corporations pay in. Some corporations are different because the 3% comes out of teachers, but a lot of times corporations will pick up that 3% that they give. The defined benefit part, the state, that's consistent with all corporations pay in on that one on there. With the new defined contribution, my understanding, it's going to be a little less money going into it. It's going to be a straight 8%, 3% that the teacher or the corporation, whoever chooses to pay that, and then 5% will come out of the school corporation paying on that. Now, corporations will still pay into the unfunded liability portion too, so they're not going to be saving anything by teacher choosing one plan over the other in the future, but they'll still be hit with the same, I think it's about 10.5% that they're putting in to make up for the unfunded liability on the pre-96 teachers.
Well, in the legislation that passed in this last session is a may provision. Teachers may elect to get into that. School districts may elect to get into it, as opposed to a shall provision. it almost struck me that this is the crack in the door where Indiana may be trying to get out of the pension business and just allow teachers to fund their own pensions.
That's probably a good descriptor. We think that's a small step that they're doing, and as we watch across the nation what's happening, it's the ways that they start getting into the door and widening it as they go, because this one is the default. If they do not choose, and corporations offering it, they'll be put into the pension plan that we have now. But there will be legislation, I'm sure, as early as next year coming out that it will not. The DC will become the default option, and so that will, start increasing that amount. And then later, I can see them just saying, we're not going to offer the pension anymore. It's just going to be a straight DC plan for future educators. They cannot affordably shift everybody there. So anyone who's in the pension system now, you'll be locked in there and be safe and have no worries. I get that question a lot from our retirees. If we make this shift, will we still be able to stay in the pension? And yes, and it will be fully funded. The legislature's done a nice job of making sure that that's funded. This year will be about $860,000 going into the pension amount just for that stabilization fund to make sure that it's fully funded.
Okay. Now, are we also part of police and fire and the public employees?
IAPSS, when it used to just be the teacher retirement fund, it was straight teachers. When they combined everybody back, which Daniel's era of governorship, which I think was because it saved a lot of money. There's eight actual pension plans that the IAPSS looks over, and they're all separate, but then we're also treated all the same. So if we get a COLA, everybody gets a COLA. If we get a 13th check, everybody gets a 13th check. They don't separate and just say public employees are going to get it or teachers. So we're separate, but treated a lot alike.
Okay, separate but equal.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Now there's a board, like board of directors. Do you sit on that board? Do you have
For
any?
IAPSS?
Yes.
No, I attend all their meetings, but I think the speaker gets to pick one or two. The president of the Senate gets to pick, and the governor places. There is a teacher that sits on the board. There's public employees on there, firemen, different ones. It's not a huge board. I think there's 8 members on the board.
Yeah, it's pretty small. Yeah.
And they make the decisions on what the rates will be and those type of things.
Okay. All right. I wasn't quite sure of the makeup with that. So we've talked a little bit about the pension plan. What other kinds of things does your association get involved with on behalf of retired teachers?
A couple more points on legislation before we skip into
Sure.
that one. There was defined contribution is a big one, but there's other talk out there this year. Last 2 years, there's been trying to get rid of the early retirement rule of 85, moving that up, pushing that back to the rule of 90, and have also heard rule of 95. It's not gotten any leverage or hasn't been brought forward, but those are bills that why we're down there advocating and watching, because they keep bringing up bills that just sort of peck away at different things. And
Sure.
Early retirement, obviously, if you go back to rule of 90 or 95, really isn't an early retirement.
No, absolutely
Because you're
not.
going to be looking at easily 60 to
and
65
Yep.
years in there. Most of them, at least at this point, look to take 1 year at a time, so it wouldn't be all of a sudden a jump to 5. And I think it would only apply to new people coming in. But again, you just never know what they're going to do, because like the defined contribution bill that they put in for new teachers that should take effect the 18-19 after they get IRS approval, be the first time that comes into effect. That was dead in conference committee, and then about 2 days before the session ended, after all testimony's gone, they pushed it into the budget bill, and a lot of the people legislators voting, didn't realize that that language was even in there. When I talked to him, he said, well, it died in conference. I said, no, it's not. It's in that 165-page document somewhere they put in. So that's the thing that you have to just watch, and the games that they play and the things that they do.
Right. Yep.
It's important for us to be there.
Absolutely. Well, we're certainly glad that we to have you as the watchdog, so to speak, and I think that's very important. it's the teacher profession has been so disrespected recently, and that's one of the reasons why we're seeing a shortage of teachers. You add this on top of all of that, and teachers are just going to feel really disrespected. They don't make a lot of money as it is, and then we're telling them, oh, by the way, now you have to fund your own pension plan. So
That's what, when we were doing the figuring and the math, to replace our today's pension in today's dollars, you'd have to save $650,000. And the estimates were that out of your paycheck right now, they said they put in 8%, the 5 and the 3. It would take close to 19% to actually reach that 650. The actuaries have put out there. So at beginning teacher at 35,000 at college debt and that, there's no way they're going to be able to save another.
and they can't save $6,500 out of that,
Now, in flat line salary ranges, I've had teachers that I hired 10 years ago that and they were making, I'll say 33,000 starting out. They're just now creeping into 40,000, where before, when we had the salary schedules and you knew you were going to get probably 1% plus whatever the corporation could afford at the time, you weren't going to get rich, but you're going to keep up with the cost of living and things, and that's just not happening in today's world.
Yeah, that career pathway just has all but disappeared, and that's very disappointing. And I think that's why you're seeing people not entering the profession, and that's why you're seeing people getting out as quickly as they can, so they can have another career path.
Just the pressure with all the accountability and putting on there, and then you open the paper and you do hear negativity about education and things on there. So it's not something that people are. That's something I want to go into on there. And I also don't think with this new DC option that 5 years they're vested, they can take all their money and run to something else. And I'm thinking, usually teachers are starting to feel comfortable in doing a good job after 3. The 3 to 5 is usually right when they start getting in the groove and start becoming pretty effective teachers. And now we're giving them the opportunity to take all that money. And I think they say that's an enticement for young people to come in or later in life. But I'm thinking, if it's such a good thing, why not in the pension? Now it takes 10 years to vest. Why not move that back to 5 years to get into our pension thing? I think that's would be more inviting to a young person or somebody thinking for their future.
Are there other bills that maybe I'm not aware of? You've mentioned a few. Were there other things in this last session that concern you?
Those are the main ones that we look at. Don't get too involved at the national level, but this new health care insurance rates and things, if they're going after the seniors and that, we'll definitely have to keep watching an eye on that one, on things on that and at national level, the health care, because that's, as you asked earlier about what other things we look at, we're definitely trying to find the best rates for supplemental plans that we can for our educators, and just different benefits and options that they can, long-term care and different things that are going to be important to us as we age, and just think of keeping ourselves out of bankruptcy or being able to afford the care and the things that we need to stay healthy and be productive.
Yep, I agree. Well, great conversation, and again, really appreciate your advocacy on behalf of the Indiana retired teachers. Where do you see the future for Indiana retired teachers headed?
The advocacy part, we keep an eye on just what's going on with pensions and that. I think an educational piece. We have IAPSS that does give information out on retirement, but I think there needs to be somebody not pushing something, but just getting our teachers educated. When I sat in, when I was looking at retirement, looking at the IAPSS meeting, I was amazed at the people that had no idea what they were going to get or choices they had in their pensions and things like that. So, we're looking a lot like you on social media and on our websites, posting information, doing podcasts, webinars, bringing in experts, that not pushing product, but just informing on some decisions as you go on. So I think that's going to be a key piece. Never thought I'd be looking at college seniors trying to educate them on their choices down the road
Yep.
with defined contribution. I was thinking we'd be looking at the 50 on up age as people were thinking early retirement or think their ducks in a row for
Yep.
retirement. So those pieces are out there. So going to work with colleges, I think, and we're going to work with our Empress and just get the information out and do that. And I don't think our name does us justice. It says Indiana Retired Teachers, but we're out there for all educators because I'm working for superintendents, I'm working for principals.
Yes, you are.
We also have public employees as secretaries, bus drivers, and although there are public employee groups, we're looking for to support all of them because we're all in this pension game together.
Right.
And
Yep.
Bill Murphy out of Rippey and things, we discussed quite a few things that help his public employee group too and stand behind each other.
Well, we're all educators. We're all in this together, and we need to support each other. And I know that I've enjoyed my work with you, and in the limited amount that we have. But you play such a key role here in the state of Indiana, and again, we just appreciate everything you do on behalf of educators. So, what advice do you have for current or future educators or educational leaders as we move forward?
Oh, stay involved and see what's going on, and anything you can do to advocate for your school, for your kids. I mean, that's what it's all about. And why we got into the job is for the children. And it seems like everybody's coming at us from all sorts of different angles. But I never thought being a teacher I'd have to be an advocate or go talk with legislators about that. I just figured we do our jobs and go about and they take care of us, and that's not quite. Everybody sort of has an idea of what they think education should look like, and I just don't think the privatizing of everything is the right way to go on there. Could we do some changes and some different things? Yes, but just this wholesale selling out of public ed, it worries me for our future.
And as you know, you do a podcast, I do a podcast, and that's one of the primary reasons that we're doing a podcast is to be advocates for public education and try to get different messages out for those that choose and elect to listen and watch this particular program, because social media is taken such a big such a large vehicle for information these days. So having this opportunity to do this podcast and speak with educational leaders such as yourself, that's how we're trying to message about public education. So,
what I have found interesting, just as when I was a principal, still watching, and how the group started pulling together when some of these things were happening with the Principals Association, working with the superintendents, teachers associations, pulling. We weren't against each other like it seemed like there was in the early days, and now everybody's sort of pulling and having the same fight because we know it affects all of us. So I've been that part, I think, has been a positive, that teachers, superintendents, principals are all pulling together and having conversations. And we still have some differences, but yet the end game is really for the kids. And I think we all sometimes go a little bit different routes, but we're all pulling together. And I'm excited that the associations have pulled together and working together and not in their own separate tunnel.
yeah, well, unfortunately, there are some folks that want to divide and conquer, and so we have to be cognizant of that and make sure that we're all standing together and stand united for the same cause, and that's for public education for the benefit of the children. So I agree.
So anyway, we retired teachers can help out superintendents or anyone. We're more than happy, and I know a lot of our teachers get back in and volunteer and do a lot of work for the schools, working with kids on reading and different skills. And as I look around the communities, the teachers just keep giving back in the retirement. We get over 1.2 million in the last 5 years we've averaged giving back to our communities after the teachers retire. Some of them said they didn't realize they had time to do these kind of things.
Sure, that's right.
But they enjoy it and they can set their schedule. So it's been great, and our communities are the ones that benefit.
Absolutely. Well, I want to thank Mr. Mellish for being our guest on IAPSS's edition of Indiana Education Insight. Now it's time to wrap up this episode with my take on the current state of affairs in Indiana education.
Dr. JT's closing comments.
Unfortunately, even though we have so much research about how to have high-quality schools, much of this research has been dismissed by our legislators. However, I see the very successful school programs and successful students at Indiana Public Schools. Today, we attended a session on personalized learning that allows teachers to drill down into learning structures for our students. If schools did not care about the learning of their students, why bother to get to this micro level of learning to ensure their success? Perhaps we can pursue this issue and others in another segment. On our next show, on July 10th, we welcome Mr. Todd Whitlock and Dr. Diana Whitlock, CEO and President for Standard for Success. Perhaps the Whitlocks can provide some additional insight into the State House and education. Join us for that and more on the next Insight into Indiana Education. Thanks for being part of education. Please stand up for Indiana Public Schools.